Hey guys, it's Mike here, and over here on my community tab, I asked you all a question, which is, if you could choose anyone from Dragon Ball to be the main character of their own arc, who would it be? And I think this was an interesting question to ask you all because there have been a lot of characters introduced over the course of the 30 plus years the Dragon Ball franchise has been going on, as you can see many of them in this picture here. But this doesn't even do justice to it, especially after the Tournament to Power, in which we were introduced to not only tens of new fighters, but also their gods and their universes. So I think it shows that there are a lot of characters in this franchise who are really interesting on their own and could potentially lead their own arc. Of course, we know that this guy over here, Goku, has been the main character for the majority of the Dragon Ball franchise, and he had some pretty great stories along the way. However, I think that some of these guys, as we see in this picture here, would also be able to have their own really interesting arc if we were to center one around it. So in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at some of your responses and giving my thoughts on them. Now, as you guys can see right here, there are a lot of comments on this particular post, so I'm not going to be able to address every single one of them during this video. And as usually the case, many of these are also going to be repeating the same information, so if I don't address every single one of them that you see, it likely comes down to that. So let's begin with the first one over here, which is everyone who isn't Goku, Vegeta, or Broly. The most I like to see about Piccolo. So I guess what they're saying here is they don't want to see any more arcs surrounding Goku, Vegeta, or Broly, which makes sense because two of them have been very, very overused in the franchise, and one of them, you know, like, how do you really build a whole story around someone so powerful? But the thing that I think is the most interesting to take away from this is the fact that they want to see one based around Piccolo. And Piccolo is certainly one of the best, in my opinion, to base an arc around, or to base an entire story around, because there is so much rich lore when it comes to Piccolo and the Namekians, and just really Piccolo's entire backstory. How King Piccolo came about, how Kami, or the Nameless Namekian rather, split himself into Kami and Piccolo, and, you know, basically how the Earth was before Piccolo came down and basically destroyed most of human civilization. How exactly did the Dragon Ball world work back then? And not to mention, Piccolo and the Namekians are very long-lived as a species. As we saw with Kami and Guru, they can live for centuries, so this means that Piccolo is also going to be a character who likely outlives pretty much everyone else in the main cast, aside from characters like Master Roshi and Majin Buu. So if we don't set a Piccolo arc sometime in the past, or even sometime during the main story, it could take place 100 or even more years in the future. After all, Piccolo is only a few years older than Gohan, which I know is really weird when you think about it, especially considering how quickly he grew. But there's a lot of potential for an arc surrounding him. As well as this next one, which says that I want to see a Beerus backstory arc, just to see his personal life and becoming a god of destruction. Again, it's also pretty similar to Piccolo because there is so much time and backstory and history surrounding Beerus. The guy has been alive for many millions of years, which means that when he was first born, when he first went up to becoming a god of destruction, the universe was in a far different place. Back then, all of the Supreme Kais of Universe 7 were still alive, including the Daikaioshin. Most of the characters we know aside from, say, Majin Buu didn't even exist. So setting something around a young Beerus and his exploits and how he acquired his incredible power and eventually became a god of destruction, as well as perhaps seeing the origin as well as Champa, and maybe some of the other gods, and perhaps some friends and allies as well as enemies that Beerus encountered along the way, would be really interesting. Plus, it'd be so cool to actually see all of Beerus' training to become a god of destruction, so the audience gains more context about what it takes to really become one. So the next one is the T-Rex, because how many times has he gotten his tail eaten? Yeah, I have to agree there. I mean, you know, I thought that he was the villain of Land Before Time, but I guess not, so maybe giving him his own arc would totally be the way to go. Totally. Whis and Beerus, just to see how that came about. Yeah, again, tying back into this one. You know, also just seeing Whis' backstory, seeing how the angels came to be. Really, even seeing one based around the creation of the multiverse. Did Zeno create the multiverse? Is there a higher god above Zeno, like maybe Zalama, or the Grand Omni King, who is actually in control of everything? You know, maybe Zeno's dad, and he's actually a baby. But I've talked about stuff like that in other videos in the past. Frieza, because we basically basically know nothing about his upbringing. And then Piccolo, because it just sounds cool. Yeah, again, Piccolo would be pretty awesome to build an arc around. Frieza, perhaps, but I feel like Frieza has just been so overused at this point in the franchise. In the past, we used to have the argument that, most of his appearances actually came from non-canon materials, but now we have him having an arc in Dragon Ball Super, showing up as a ally of the protagonist in the Tournament to Power, once again being a antagonist in the Broly movie, and, it kind of goes on from there. So I could certainly see it being interesting to build maybe a short saga around Frieza, but I honestly think it'd be a lot more interesting to see the rise of King Cold, the creation of the Galactic Empire, and, so much about the backstory. Because again, like with some of these other comments, the backstory and the actual world building of Dragon Ball is something that I find more interesting than just seeing a whole story built around Frieza. Goten Trunks. The arc is that they become teenagers and look like it also. I mean, yeah, they already are teenagers right now in Dragon Ball Super, even though they look like they're just as young, if not younger, than they were in Dragon Ball Z based on the art style. So they definitely need to get older. I'm so tired of them not being actual teenagers like they were at the end of the 10-year time skip in Dragon Ball Z. It's going to be pretty annoying if they just show up in one arc and it's like, they had a big growth spurt off screen, But these two characters really got screwed over in the Buu saga because they were built up to be the ones to defeat Majin Buu, the sons of the Saiyans who were the next generation who were going to fuse together into the ultimate unbeatable warrior Gotenks until of course he got beaten multiple times. And then eventually in Dragon Ball Super became a total joke when he was beaten up by base Vegeta, only to make Goku and Vegeta seem stronger, which was completely unnecessary. I mean, these two became the youngest Super Saiyans of all time, so the fact that they can't actually have an arc built around them where they accomplish something is a little bit irksome. I think it'd be really cool, for example, if they went to train with Master Roshi. Even though Master Roshi should seemingly be way weaker than they are, as we saw in the Tournament to Power, that's not really the case anymore, but even if he was, he still has a lot to teach them about respect, about being real martial artists, and not just being kids who slack off and don't accomplish anything. That pig guy, he's a hero. You mean Oolong? I mean, just imagine, guys, let's think about it like this. What if Oolong won his game of rock, paper, scissors against Beerus? I mean, if he won that game, Beerus would just left, there would be no Super Saiyan God, maybe Frieza would show up and defeat everyone, unless Oolong showed up again and said, rock, paper, scissors time, Gohan. It would be the perfect redemption story, especially after how he was treated after the Cell arc. Well, I mean, Gohan I feel like has already been kind of redeemed, if you want to put it in that direction, in Dragon Ball Super, like after not training and constantly letting everyone down, he trained and became far more powerful than ever and was helping his team out in the Tournament to Power, and essentially took out the Flash of Universe 11. So as far as I'm concerned, he's redeemed, but I feel like the main issue really comes down to character utilization, how he's used, and basing an arc around Gohan and him actually using his brain to learn more about martial arts and abilities, and maybe even, figuring out what he's even a scholar of, figuring out what his job really is, and seeing him develop more beyond the surface level that they've addressed in Super, I think would be a really cool idea. And it would definitely be nice considering the fact that they were building up the Buu saga to be his arc, and then they threw him in the background and he's never recovered since. Everyone who deserves one, aka Piccolo and Tien Shinhan. Again, Piccolo would be a great idea, and Tien Shinhan, Tien, as many people in the dub world know him as, is also a really great character because, he was introduced as this ultimate prodigy, someone who was so badass that he was able to negate a Kamehameha and use a move like the Tri-Beam that could literally kill someone who was not as skilled as him. The guy even learned the Mafuba within a day, basically doing the same thing that Goku did many years later in the Goku Black arc. Unfortunately, they didn't let him use it in the manga, and the anime, he basically used it to become fodder for Drum. But ultimately, I think that Tien is one of the most hardworking and coolest characters in the franchise who is so underutilized, and giving him his own arc would be great. It's a tie between Yamcha and Krillin. They desperately need a power boost. Krillin got a ridiculous power boost in Dragon Ball Super to where he was able to overpower base Goku, and then was able to push back Goku's Super Saiyan Blue Kamehameha, even though obviously he wasn't going full power. But Yamcha, on the other hand, has essentially become a joke and a meme, which is something I'm going to be addressing in my next video on this channel that you guys should definitely look out for. But I think doing an arc around Krillin being a police officer and having to solve cases and use his superpowers to overcome really difficult obstacles would be really cool to watch. And the same thing with Yamcha. Like, why don't we do a whole arc about how Yamcha is taking his baseball team to, like, the Dragon Ball's version of the World Series? And maybe there would be other teams who have their own versions of superpowers that they're using to improve their baseball games and cheat. So Yamcha has to overcome them and maybe train his team in the ways of Ki in order to become the ultimate baseball team of all time. I mean, really, there's so much to do, and that was just off the top of my head. So I think it would be fun to give them their own little mini arc. Hit and Jiren, I'd like to see more of their backstory in their universe. Yeah, again, Dragon Ball Super didn't really explore as much of the other universes as most fans would have liked. You know, when it was first being pitched in the Universe 6 tournament arc, it seemed like they were telling us that Goku and friends were going to go through all these different universes to collect the Super Dragon Balls. Or at the very least, he was going to go to these universes and meet new people and do way more than he actually ended up doing. Because Dragon Ball Super kind of followed that Dragon Ball Z formula where most things just came to Earth, or, you know, if they actually went somewhere other than Earth, the location wasn't really anywhere near as rich as it could have been. For example, the Future Trunks timeline, which is just a crappier version of Earth where everyone dies and death actually means something. A tournament ground in neutral space in the Universe 6 tournament, and of course the ring in the Tournament to Power, which is literally in a realm of nothingness. But honestly, I'd much rather see an arc surrounding Hit, considering the fact that he's over 1,000 years old. Again, he likely has so much backstory and so much that he's done over the course of those many centuries. How he acquired his power, how he learned to be a hitman, maybe encountering other hitmen along the way, and having some really cool jobs he had to pull. And I actually did my own video in the past talking about how I would do an episode of Hit, which you guys should check out. Vegito for a whole arc. Maybe we could finally see some more personality and learn more about how a fusion thinks. So this would pretty much have to take place within the Dragon Ball Z continuity, before they retcon fusion, or at least Batara fusion, to say that it actually isn't permanent anymore and it only lasts an hour for mortals. But the idea of Vegito staying fused together for an entire arc or for the rest of the series has always been something that's been really interesting and tantalizing to fans. And there could be some cool little interactions. You know, for example, how does their marriage work? You know, is Vegito now married to both Chi-Chi and Bulma? How does that work? What if they were to try and have kids? You know, there are so many different wacky angles they could approach with this that I think would be fun to take a look at. But, you know, aside from that, it's basically just Goku and Vegeta mixed together into one person. I'm not too sure how long-lasting the appeal of that really would be, or how much it would really change aside from just combining two different characters. And for all we know, fans might just get tired of it and want to see these characters remain as two once again. But I think doing an arc about this would be really interesting, especially considering that we've never seen a fusion like Vegito actually train for a significant period of time. And I can only imagine just how incredible his potential would be compared to Goku and Vegeta's. I want to see a whole arc for Fat Boo, so we can get some much needed character development. Yeah, I mean, we definitely got some character development in the Boo saga, and even a little bit in Dragon Ball Super. Like in the Universe Survival arc, when Boo was going to enter the tournament so that he can get a wish for Mr. Satan, and, you know, he even trained a little bit under Mr. Satan. But I feel like Majin Buu is one of the most misused characters in Dragon Ball Super because, aside from the most recent arc in the Moro arc, where he's seen a far bigger involvement, the truth is that they constantly just kind of put him off in the background. Either because they didn't have the imagination to actually write a story while using his many powers, or they just thought that he'd be too overpowered, so they always wanted to try and sideline him by making him fall asleep during two different tournament arcs, which I really did not like, and I know most fans didn't either. So seeing a whole arc based around him, again, you know, maybe during the millions of years before the Dragon Ball story, would be pretty cool. Ginyu, because of his body change. What was his original body? Did he learn the technique? Was it specific to his original alien race? How he met Frieza and lots of cool stuff. Yeah, that's a really great idea, and I think doing a whole Ginyu Force backstory, especially with Captain Ginyu, showing his original true form, which we're almost certain that the form that we see him encounter Goku in is not his true form, because, again, if it was, how would he even know he could switch bodies with someone, did he just quickly switch back to his original body? I don't think so. So, it'd be really cool to see him actually, work his way up the ranks of the Frieza Force, again, give more backstory on the Frieza Force, which is something that I thought was really cool with Dragon Ball Super Broly and how they handled it, and humanized the Frieza Force a lot more. Seeing how he met the other Ginyu Force members, maybe there were different members of the team along the way who got killed in combat, who also had their own unique abilities. I think there's definitely a lot to explore with him. And then Kefla says, my boy, the MVP 17. So yeah, Android 17 I think is a character who would be pretty cool to base an arc around. Considering all the shine and development they gave him in the Universe Survival arc that kind of came out of nowhere, I think that he's a character who could definitely carry at least an arc on his own. Seeing his wife and kids and experiencing his home life, watching as he actually protects his island from poachers, and considering that Goten and Trunks are now seeming to become more accustomed to taking care of the island and actually really enjoy it, there's a lot of potential for him leaving the island and going off on different adventures. Plus, we could see more of his backstory about how him and 18 were kidnapped by Dr. Gero, experimented on, and how it plagues him even to this day, because that's not really something you ever get over, and I feel like Android 17, much like future Trunks, is probably a character who suffers from some form of PTSD as a result of that, and I think that would be a great way to contrast the two characters, because they used to be complete mortal enemies, when they were first introduced. So seeing the duality between Trunks and Android 17, I think would take Android 17 to a whole new level as a character, and would be a really compelling story. So there were a lot of great ideas here for different characters who should get their own arc in Dragon Ball. And now that I've shared my own thoughts about them, let me know yours down below in the comments. If you like this content, you can help support LSM on Patreon, a link to which is down below in the description. Make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications, so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.